My guest today, John Moore, did walking patrol in Vietnam alone and at night searching for terrorist booby traps, and he saw what happened to those who didn't find them. John's also engaged in special and covert operations, psychological operations, and has worked as a private investigator for many, many years. I met John at Vince Finelli's USA Prepares Survival Expo a couple months ago in Springfield, Missouri, and I really liked what he had to say. In researching, delving into the issues of Planet X, a.k.a. Nibiru, the destroyer, John has interviewed dozens of U.S. Navy submarine and surface fleet veterans on the subject of rapid global sea level rise, gleaning information that the mainstream media won't tell you. He has produced 2 major videos on the subject of Planet X, videos that are backed up by diligent research, documented history, and scientific fact. John, welcome to the Prepper Patch.
Thank you, Tony. Good to be here.
Yeah, this is a show I've been wanting to have for a while, and I decided to have it right after the, as we've talked about repeatedly, right after the date that so many people profited by falsely accusing the Mayans of claiming that the end of the world would happen on December 21st, 2012, which you and I know they never said.
They never did. And the Mayan elders have just about had it with us Anglos saying this, quite frankly. Anyway, I've been anticipating December 21st to come and go. There's been a lot of hysteria, and it's behind us, so it's time to move on to more serious things.
That's right. That's right. And before we do, I wanted to just visit on why this date became such an apocalyptic doomsday date. Obviously, the Mayans did not say that, as we know. One of the things I came up with was that businesses, people that wanted to make money, just decided to prey on people's fears and encourage them to part with their money by preying on their fears. What's your feelings on that? Is that one of the reasons you think?
Well, that would be part of it. There's agendas and there's hidden agendas, Tony.
Yeah.
Some of the people involved with the Mayan calendar disinformation, if you look at their websites, it looks like something IBM or Ford Motor Company would do. Very slick, very professional. I have a webmaster and a website, and my friend Professor McCanny does. You can tell that we're obviously not putting big bucks into it. So there's a big clue there. When you see a website that looks like something from a Fortune 500 company connected to this, there's a clue that there may be something deeper and more evil, quite frankly, than what's obvious. We went through this before in 2003 with this elderly woman, I won't mention her name, who claimed to be in telepathic contact with alien beings. And they told her that in May of 2003, the 10th planet would come through our solar system, creating a massive havoc. Of course, that came and went, and that once again, we saw efforts that appear to be backed up by some fairly deep pockets. There was a very strong interest among the powers that be, Tony, to have people get distracted and by these false dates, have the dates come and go, and then throw a lot of discredit to legitimate researchers like myself and you and Professor McCanny, my friend Steve Quayle and Stan Deo and others, so that people won't pay attention to the serious researchers.
It's a little bit like the boy who cried wolf, right? Keeps crying wolf, and then people will then when the real threat really appears, which is Planet X, which does exist, which your research and McKinney's and others have verified is coming. When the call goes out to pay attention to that, everybody, that's another one of those 2012 things. Ha ha ha, yeah. You know.
I know. And another 2012 thing, another Y2K thing.
Yeah.
Make fun of it and just disregard it.
The boy who cried wolf. Yep.
I have to admit, Tony, that they've been very largely successful.
Yes, they have.
They have. So now we're past it. It's time to move on to more serious things. The 10th planet is a clear and present danger, and it has already created a massive change in our world, that being the fact, and it is scientifically provable fact, that on June 12th, 2010, 2.5 years ago, the Gulf Stream stopped. I was just on the parking lot. I'm at a restaurant here locally talking with a friend. And he says, John, it's 65 degrees. There's bugs and flies out. It's 2 days before Christmas. What's wrong with this picture? You know?
Yeah.
But when the Gulf Stream stopped 2.5 years ago, Tony, it discontinued regulating the jet stream. And that's the connection there. And what it means to everybody listening to you and me down in Arizona and other places right now is the havoc this is already playing with agriculture, cattle raising, anything involving row crops, corn, wheat, rice, soybeans, barley, spelt, oats, and so forth. The grain farmers are in deep trouble, and that translates into dramatically increased prices for all food products. And that's where we are right now. We don't need to, and I know you get this all the time, Tony, people looking for a date on a calendar when they need to be ready.
Right.
We're already here.
Right.
The time is now. We're dealing with the effects of the 10th planet right now in our face with the fact, and it is a scientifically provable fact, that the Gulf Stream has stopped. And you look at grain futures, you look at cattle futures. Cattle futures for March, just 3 months away, are at all-time highs. All-time highs. You're going to see the same thing happening with grains, corn, wheat, rice, spelt, oats, barley. All-time highs for all the grains. There's grains, for example, they put wheat in tomato soup, Tony, as a thickener. You know, there's grains and things you would never suspect. Chicken, pork, and beef, they all consume grains.
John, is the Gulf Stream stopping part of what caused a lot of the brutally cold winters in Northern Europe, England, and the other countries that they've had the last couple of years?
You're right. You're on the right track. And that happened within, well, first, of course, the Gulf Stream stopped in June. Just a few weeks later. Now, Moscow is a bit unique for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons Moscow is unique, they have accurate weather records going back a millennium, more than 1,000 years. There's very few places on the planet that have weather records going back 1,000 years. In June and July, or especially July of 2010, Moscow had the coldest winter in 1,000 years.
Wow.
Just 6 months later, they had the coldest winter in 1,000 years. Right now in Moscow, they're having brutally... Now, people who live in Moscow know about cold weather.
They drink vodka to get through it, from what I understand.
Well, that doesn't work too well, but they do it. But they're having temperatures right now in the early to mid-December of minus 50 degrees centigrade. Now, people are dying in Moscow right now because of extremely cold weather, and you don't know what winter is till you've been through winter in Moscow, but even they are not prepared to deal with what's happening.
John, we're going to have to go to break here. When we come back, I'd like to talk some more about this, and specifically about the interviews you've done with a lot of high-ranking Navy officers on this information. More who have spent years researching Planet X and the real reasons behind global warming. Before we bring John back, I want to just mention his website for our listeners that want to go there. It's www.thelibertyman.com. He's got a very well-developed website there. You can actually buy videos of his global warming DVD, which I have bought from him in Springfield and watched it and thoroughly enjoyed it. It was very eye-opening, and it had a lot of credible facts in there. John, let's talk a little bit about your research that you've done and the depth and breadth of it with countless Navy officers over several years, and what you've heard from the briefings that they've had with you, or that they've shared with you.
Well, yes, Tony, this is what's unique about my work as opposed to everybody else I'm aware of. It's a combination of both naval officers, one intelligence officer from another service, mostly enlisted men, because there's more enlisted men than officers, obviously. And the majority of these men were connected somehow, some way to the U.S. Navy Submarine Corps. And what most people don't know, Tony, is that the U.S. Navy Submarine Corps is almost a service unto themselves. They have their own uniforms. They have very high standards to even get in there. The lowest IQ allowed is 120, and they go up from there. And, of course, the average IQ being 100.
Right.
They don't associate with the service Navy or the naval aviators, and the highest-ranking submarine officers maintain their loyalty to the submarine corps, and they take care of each other. If you can imagine being in a tin box for 6 months without seeing sunshine with 100 or so men, absolutely reliant on each other for your very life, you form very tight and very strong ties that cannot be broken over the years. So I first stumbled upon this. A very dear friend of mine, he retired from the U.S. Navy. He was a Navy SEAL and spent many months on submarines, as Navy SEALs seem to do. And we were having lunch in the summer of 2005, and he happened to tell me about a classified briefing about rising ocean levels. I'd already been studying the 10th planet for a number of years before that, so I knew immediately what the source of the rising ocean levels would be, and that's interaction with the 10th planet. It was only a couple of months later, Tony, I had a speaking engagement to talk about terrorism with a local university college, and there was another speaker there, a retired intelligence officer from another service, not the Navy. So we spoke to the college students. We went to a local pizza place in Rolla, Missouri, and we were sitting there, he and I, his wife, and my friend, a college professor. At some point during our pizza, I found out he did a 3-year tour of duty with the Navy, Submarine Corps. And I never met this man before, Tony, and I knew I may never see him again. So I had to ask the question, tell me what you know about rising ocean levels. So before he can speak up, Tony, his wife speaks up, sitting next to me. She says, John, we're stationed at the Pentagon. It's our last tour of duty. We need to pick a place to retire to. We picked the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks because of rising ocean levels. Well, I immediately made an appointment to meet him the following week and start making the second revisions. My friend and I had started a month before making the first revisions to recreate the map shown to these men in the classified briefings, a map showing North America with new coastlines, the old coastlines being flooded and underwater. It was only a few weeks after that in one of my pistol classes, I teach concealed carry training for people to carry pistols. And one of my students turned out to be a retired Navy submarine officer. During a lunchtime break, I found this out, and I made an appointment with him the following week. And he worked with me to make the third and final revisions to recreate the map that you saw on my DVD.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about maps.
The real Navy map.
You have the real Navy map on your DVD, but the maps that are on the internet, that if people Google U.S. Navy sea level map, those are not.
Right.
Those are manufactured by people and their maps really don't depict what the naval map that you've seen or that you've heard of depicts.
You're right. About 2.5 years ago, Tony, somebody took the well-known psychic Gordon Michael Scallion's map, and they posted on the internet claiming it was the Navy map.
The official Navy map, right, which it's not.
Yeah,
so I just want to make that clear to all our listeners, because I Googled it when I heard about this Planet X and the rising sea levels, and that map, they both show Florida basically gone, right? Both the real one and this one.
Now, Scallion put his map together in the early to mid 1980s. From the Rocky Mountains east, Scallion's map is actually fairly accurate, with the exception of Wisconsin. The Navy map shows Wisconsin gone. Scallion's map does not. From the Rocky Mountains west, there's no similarity whatsoever.
Yeah, his map shows areas that are 5,000-6,000 feet above, 8,000 feet above sea level gone, which would be hard to believe.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Which detracts credibility.
The real Navy map shows damage in California, Oregon, and Washington going 50 to 100 miles inland, not going hundreds of miles all the way to Nevada. That's a fantasy.
It's a lot more credible, right?
Right. So the real Navy map is on my DVD, Global Warming, What the Government Isn't Telling You. And during these briefings, Tony, the Navy veterans, they weren't veterans at the time, they were active duty Navy submarine members, they were told that when they retire, they may want to move to the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks as a known safe haven, which many thousands of them did. I was on a nationwide speaking tour with the Prophecy Club early in 2005, and while I was on a break, a man introduced him at the Detroit stop. A man came up and shook my hand. He says, John, I'm in the insurance industry. We've wondered for years, why are there so many retired Navy people in the zip codes of the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks?
You're getting multiple independent verifications of this claim.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, because I am active in the community, I teach concealed carry classes. I've had hundreds of students, the majority of them from the Missouri Ozarks. I've bumped into about 24 of these Navy veterans in the last 5-6 years. All of them have amazingly similar, almost duplicate stories about what they saw and heard in the classified Navy briefings. Right. I've tracked it back all the way to 1979. When they held a briefing for flag rank officers, admirals, in New Orleans in 1979. So this has been a consistent thing for a number of years now. And the Navy veterans, the submarine men, were not told any specific date. They were told this will happen in your lifetime, and to get ready, basically, to retire from the Navy, set up an independent lifestyle in a safe haven, the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks being one of them, and just live your life and enjoy life. And that's, quite frankly, Tony, they're not worried about a date.
Right.
They don't think about a date. Right. It's not a healthy or pleasant way to live.
Right, yeah, and that's where
anguishing over a date.
That's right. The Bible says that. One of my main websites is myfearlessfuture.org, and it talks about being fearless and how to be fearless and why to be fearless. And we're gonna have to go to break in a little bit here. And in our last segment, at 3/4 after the hour, we're going to talk. You mentioned the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks, and it's funny. I sent you that DVD from Jesse Ventura's conspiracy theory, where he investigated reports that there's all sorts of underground bunkers being built in the Ozarks. And at the end, we'll talk a little bit about that in our fourth segment, but I just want to give a little teaser to our listening audience to stay tuned for the rest of the show. And I want to share with our listeners how absolutely lucky they are that we have John Moore on here. There is so much disinformation that's been out on the Internet about December 21st, 2012, about Planet X, Nibiru, the Destroyer, Wormwood. There's just, 90+% of this stuff is just, it's either intentional disinformation or it's people that are just fantasizing. And what's unique in my experience about John Moore is he has done legitimate research with directly from source people that have heard these briefings from the military, and he's confirmed it again. And the story is the same story he keeps hearing again and again and again, and he's interviewed dozens of these people. And so it's really valuable to have him on the show. John, I want to thank you. We're going to go to break now. And when we guest today, he has spent years researching Planet X and a lot of the disinformation about it. Planet X is real, is the result of his research. John, please share with our listeners the correlations that you've discovered between Planet X and global warming.
Great question. You mentioned a film at the beginning of the show. I'm going to mention another film that I think is worth looking at, and actually, I may surprise you. I'm going to mention a couple of films. One of them may surprise you quite a bit. The first film I urge people to watch is titled The Day After Tomorrow with Dennis Quaid. I sometimes say that what we're living right now is the day after tomorrow in slow motion. The underlying premise of the film is that the Gulf Stream stops, and that throws the world into a new ice age. There are some statements in there that are true and are scientifically accurate. There's also some science fiction in the film. The scientifically accurate things are when one of the scientists says, you can't have an ice age until you have global warming, which is true. You have to have that first. You have to have global warming first before you can have an ice age. And that's what we're seeing right now. The planet is warming up. That the reason the Gulf Stream stopped is because of fresh water being introduced into all the oceans that has reduced the salinity, reduced the salt content of the oceans. Salt water behaves differently than fresh water, Tony. And the engine that drove the Gulf Stream before it stopped, and there's still part of the Gulf Stream left, I should say, by the way, was the salt content of the water. And there's been university-level experiments that demonstrated several times with the same results, that if you move warm salt water through cold salt water, there will be a thermal barrier between the two, allowing the warm salt water to move in a continuous, unbroken stream through the cold salt water, which is what the Gulf Stream did for many, many centuries. When you introduce fresh water and reduce the salinity, that thermal barrier breaks down. That's what's going on in the Atlantic Ocean right now. At the moment, on December 23rd, 2012, the Gulf Stream comes up the east coast of the United States, past Florida, Georgia, South Carolina. It gets to about Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, starts going east by northeast. It goes out a few hundred miles, does a loop-to-loop, peters out, and stops. There's a link on my website, thelibertyman.com, to the both a screenshot from an old Navy map. They publish this every 24 hours, when the Gulf Stream was still flowing, a map showing sea surface temperatures, and also a link to the current Navy sea surface temperature map, which is updated every 24 hours. Anybody can look for themselves and see the proof for themselves from a mainstream source, that mainstream source being the U.S. Navy. So the Gulf Stream has stopped, and this film, The Day After Tomorrow, is premised on the Gulf Stream having stopped. Now, the science fiction in there is that human activity creating CO2 greenhouse gases is the reason for that. Nothing could be further from the truth. That is a fantasy. Now go ahead, Tony.
I was going to say, for some of our listeners that are skeptical, and I know you're skeptical, and I'm skeptical, and that's, it's our skepticism and it drives and fuels our research. I just wanted to ask you to share with our listeners what you told me privately. Isn't one of the ways that you and the researchers that have really looked into this have been able to correlate that it's Planet X and not carbon dioxide increases that's driving the global warming is because the glaciers in Antarctica and the Greenland, they're actually starting to melt from underneath, not on top.
They're melting from the bottom. Right. The ice sheet at Greenland, the ice at the Antarctic is melting from the bottom. Now, the ice melt at the North Pole, it's floating seawater, so it doesn't change the ocean level or the salinity, either one. But the largest reservoir of fresh water on the planet is the Antarctic.
Right, massive.
And the next largest is Greenland.
Massive. Yeah.
Freshwater reservoirs.
Yeah.
People always focus on how much that will increase the level of the ocean, which is significant. If both those sheets of ice melted, it would raise the oceans enough to flood all coastal areas to a certain extent. However, what it's already done is reduce the salinity of the oceans, which is the root cause of the Gulf Stream having stopped. So the film The Day After Tomorrow is very significant. Now, I might surprise you by saying this. Al Gore's film, An Inconvenient Truth, I've talked to very few people who watched the whole thing. There is science in there, and there's science fiction in the movie. The science fiction in Al Gore's film is that human activity is creating CO2 greenhouse gases that's warming up the planet. That's science fiction. The science in there, which is real science, is that as a consequence of this planet warming up, we will have rising ocean levels. Another part of the science fiction is the time frame. He says the middle of the century. It's not going to be that long. I can't say when, but it will be a lot closer to us than 2050.
And part of that is because Planet X, as it approaches its perihelion, coming around the solar system every 3,600 years, I believe, its speed changes rapidly. So whatever speed it's traveling at 5 years ago or 2 years ago or this year, it's changing. It's like rocket science, and you're not even developing the rocket, basically, right? So even the government doesn't necessarily know exactly when it's going to be here. They just know it. They've seen it. They have a better knowledge than anybody. They're not about to release that information. But any good-sized object coming into our solar system, it starts behaving like a comet, having a tail behind it, and also speeding up and slowing down as it goes past the various planetary objects, which makes trying to figure out a trajectory and speed very, very difficult.
Well, the trajectory is easy to figure, but the speed is difficult because of the way it speeds up and slows down.
And we probably didn't have a lot of technology 3,600 years ago, the last time it was around, to be measuring this thing and assessing it. So
anyway, Tony, this planetary-sized object, and people, when you start talking about astronomy, people want to hear about somebody with credentials. Well, I'm a homicide detective. I'm no scientist. But how about this for credentials? The supervising astronomer of the United States Naval Observatory.
That's James
Dr.
McCanney.
Robert Harrington.
Oh, Harrington.
No,
okay. Harrington.
Dr. Robert Harrington.
Right.
Now, if you're going to draw a paycheck, Tony, for looking at stars, do you think you might have any more upward mobility than being the supervising astronomer
director
of the United States Naval Observatory? Hardly.
Right.
You're at the top of your career field. And there's a DVD available on my website. It's entitled Are We Alone? And he's interviewed in his office at the United States Naval Observatory by another key figure, Zechariah Sitchin. And he's talking about the 10th planet as a matter of scientific fact, not scientific speculation. He gives it size, 3 to 5 times the size of Earth. He says it has a far larger iron-nickel core. He shows its orbit. all right there in his office at the United States Naval Observatory.
And what's the name of your DVD again that has this on that?
That's I didn't produce it, but it is available at my website, right. entitled "Are We Alone in the Universe?" Are We Alone? Okay. And this is the supervising director of the Naval Observatory, right? The United States Naval Observatory supervising astronomer. Okay. Exactly. Right. So. And that interview was done in the late 1980s, so this has been around a long time. The federal government figured this out in 1979. They've been preparing for it ever since. I won't mention this man's name, but I got his business card in my pocket here. I'm going to pull out and read his title. Homeland Security Regional Response System Coordinator. And how's that for a title? Right. Now, I had coffee with this man about a month ago, and he verified everything that I'm saying. His wife was present at this meeting, and I found out, toward the end of the meeting, he'd never told his wife about any of this stuff. Talk about compartmentalizing knowledge. Well, yeah, and I think they must have had an interesting discussion that night over dinner. You know, why didn't you tell me about this, honey? Well, I didn't want you to worry. I got it all covered. Yeah, right. And during our meeting, a friend of his was sitting at his elbow, and he turns to me. He says, "Now you know why I've been doing all the stuff I've been doing, don't you?" Yeah. But among certain insiders in the intelligence community and Homeland Security, this is just as common as knowing about today's weather. Yeah. I mean, it's it is in certain circles. But the general public does not have a clue, and that's by design, Tony. And we're absolutely by design. We're going to hit on this a little bit in our last segment, but isn't it true that the government has built things under the Denver airport and in Salt Lake and in the Ozarks and other areas to shift the operations that are currently... They moved enough dirt at the Denver airport to build a brand new Panama Canal. Yeah. And I remember as that thing was going up, it was over budget, it was taking too long, and my BS meter was starting to get active about, why is this They didn't even need an airport. Yeah, and it was very, from an aviation point of view, it was not a good location to build one. Altitude and wind direction and wind speeds have a lot to do where you pick a site for an airport. It was not a good site. And either last year or 2 years ago, Jesse did a story on that, and he actually interviewed a military official at the opening of the underground bunker, admitting that that's what it's there for and that it's only open for the government and the public is not welcome. And, that's right. So, we're going to be going to break in a little bit here. We're going to our fourth segment. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the reasons why, the government's building these bunkers, where they're building them, cover the Jesse Ventura thing, and really, help convince our listeners that this is real. I waited to do this show till after December 21st, 2012, because I didn't want this subject to get mixed or blurred with the whole 2012 thing. So that's why we're doing it now. We hit it as quickly as we could, just 2 days after December 21st. And as much as that deadline, which was a false deadline, which was made up, wasn't true, it was the boy crying wolf, and the wolf is coming. I want to spend the last segment talking about some more validity of what's going on as far as the government building bunkers. And I want to lead with, I sent you the DVD a couple of weeks ago that Jesse Ventura had about, he started the show with, okay, people, they're talking about the government's building all these underground bunkers in the Ozarks. We need to see if this is fact or fiction. And at the end of the video, they show his TV crew driving through what are dozens and dozens of miles of underground bunkers with government, I don't know if they're government, they're semi-tractor trailers passing them. And these caverns were so voluminous that they had to speed up the video to make them effectively look like they're driving a couple 100 miles an hour, just like ESPN when a guy's running a touchdown back and they don't want to spend 9 seconds running the clip. They speed the guy up to make it only 3 seconds long. They showed minutes and minutes of this car driving at 40, 50 miles an hour through dozens of miles of underground bunkers. I know you got a chance to look at that. And, of course, we all know about the Denver airport. There's Salt Lake. These are preparations they're making for a reason. And, it ties into why they're stockpiling guns and bullets and all the other MREs. There's, people, our listeners, if you're not into this, you can search this all out on the Internet. It's all out there. It's just a matter of doing the research. And so tell us a little bit what you've discovered that we haven't already covered on that. Well, first of all, Missouri is my home state, and much of the state has a lot of limestone. Limestone's a relatively soft rock that's easy, relatively easy and inexpensive to make these man-made caverns that are used for the storage and other purposes. They're very secure and relatively easy to climate control, since you have a constant temperature of 55 degrees without doing anything.
Right.
There's some of them in the Ozarks. There's also a much larger complex up near Kansas City. So I saw the Ventura show, and thank you for sending that to me, Tony. Now everybody knows what I've been saying for years, is that the Arkansas-Missouri Ozarks is one of the known safe havens for the following reasons. First of all, altitude above sea level. The second, distance from major bodies of water. Third, a fairly long growing season, a very relatively short, mild winter. Plenty of water for growing crops. A relatively homogeneous population. No major cities in the Arkansas-Missouri Ozarks. Springfield, Missouri is the largest city, it being 250,000 people. For all those reasons, the Arkansas-Missouri Ozarks has been designated one of the known safe havens by the U.S. Navy. And now that Ventura put out his show, millions of people know the same thing.
Yeah, and it's on YouTube for those of you that missed it on True TV. And as you said, many of the dozens and dozens of these military people you've talked to have corroborated that the military's told them, hey, buddy, when you retire, a nice place to plan and hanging out to get through what's coming is the Arkansas-Missouri Ozarks, right?
That's right, absolutely.
Yeah. Now,
it's a vast area. It's a vast area comprising tens of thousands of square miles. Just one county. Yeah. Just one county in Missouri, in the Arkansas and Missouri Ozarks. Texas County is larger than the entire state of Rhode Island.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, do you know of any large contingents of retired naval officers who are hanging out in Miami or low-lying coastal areas in Florida or anywhere else for that matter?
You won't. You'll find some, but not many. You'll find some.
Only those that didn't pay attention to the briefings that they had an opportunity to be exposed to.
People have their priorities and things they're going to do. They're independent, of course. But the real concentration of retired Navy personnel is in the Arkansas-Missouri Ozarks.
So I'd like to summarize for our listeners. This is one of the most important shows we've had. And to summarize, Planet X is real based on the wide body of research you've done, and it's corroborated with Robert Harrington, James McCanney, who we haven't talked about. We should probably bring him into this a little bit. And it's the 10th planet. What did you say? It was 5 times larger than Earth?
Well, Dr. Harrington said 3 to 5 times.
3 to 5 times.
Of Earth.
And it's periodically visits us every 3,600 years, from what I understand. It's on an elliptical, not a circular orbit. And it is the cause, based on the research you've done, for global warming, potential for rising sea levels, stopping the Gulf Stream. And we don't know when it's going to hit, but it's supposedly going to bring a haymaker when it does. Is that correct?
Well, that's the precedence, Tony, is that when it comes through our solar system, it creates havoc on our planet. There is precedence for a shift of true north, not magnetic north, which is already changing dramatically, but a shift of true north. And what it does is magnetic north moves in a certain direction for many, many decades and centuries, and then true north catches up in a matter of 24 to 48 hours. And when that happens, that will cause the bulge of water at the equator. And this is common knowledge in every geology department at every university. The bulge of water, not quite 500 feet above what we call sea level measured at Cornwall, England, to shift and flood all coastal areas worldwide. That's what will happen.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to share with us in the last few minutes? I know we haven't really talked much about James McCanney.
Professor McCanney is a regular guest on my show, usually Wednesday mornings if he's available. He has his own website. There's a link on my link page, Tony, to Professor McCanney's website. He has his own radio show every week, and he is doing some guest appearances, and I can help you get him on your show if you like. Yeah,
I think I'd like to do that.
Okay.
Is there anything that he's discovered that we haven't already covered in our show so far?
Well, there's a lot. He's a credentialed astrophysicist, and given the time, we could not do it justice in the time we have left.
Well, I know he's also featured on a History Channel 6-part special called Countdown to Apocalypse that started on November 9th. I only found out about that about a week ago, and I actually recorded the last episode, and I haven't had a chance to watch that. But just like a lot of things that are on the TV ending up on YouTube, so if people want to look for a program called Countdown to Apocalypse on the History Channel, apparently Jim's website says that he's featured on most, if not all, of those episodes, and it's talking about a lot of this subject matter.
And Professor McCanny and myself, we're both featured in the Japanese equivalent of 60 Minutes. We don't know when it's going to be broadcast, but he and I both spent a lot of time with the Japanese film crews. So
a couple other things I wanted to chat about in the last few minutes we have here. What if, considering all the body research you've done, again, we don't want to put fear in people's minds, but we do want to at least give them the opportunity to have the exposure to some knowledge that they may not be able to obtain from official government or media sources. So knowing that Planet X is coming without necessarily knowing when it's coming, what are some of the things that you're going to look for to have an idea of when it's a little closer? I think at one point you had mentioned maybe the government may start pulling some people out of low-lying coastal areas ahead of this coming to preserve their lives.
Right. Well, it's the nature of any large organization to take care of their own.
Right.
And we've been getting sporadic reports of the military bases in these coastal areas, of them moving out equipment and supplies under cover of darkness. As you might imagine, it's a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, it's a cloak and dagger thing.
At the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, for example, which is the world's largest naval shipyard, they're frantically working to get the ships that are in dry dock seaworthy and out to sea where they'll be safe, as opposed to being helpless victims in dry dock.
Right.
And these other bases, Camp Pendleton, Camp Lejeune, which are both on the east and west coast, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is only about 200 feet above sea level, not far from the east coast. All these places, we're looking at supplies and equipment being moved under cover of darkness. They can move the men relatively quickly at the last minute because men can get up and walk, but supplies and equipment cannot.
Yeah, especially dry dock ships,
Exactly. So these large, heavy, expensive pieces of equipment and all the supplies they've got, they're being moved inland to safe areas, to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and other places that they regard as being safe.
And just to be the skeptic with the last 2 or 3 minutes we have here, people might wonder, well, why wouldn't the government tell us about this? Well, one of the reasons is they want to avoid panic, and they want to keep the economy going as best as they can keep it limping along. And if people that live in low-lying areas knew that Planet X was imminent, they would intelligently close up their businesses.
Doing their normal activity.
Yeah.
The federal government relies on UPS and FedEx for spare parts and logistics, just like you and I do.
That's right.
And they want everything working normally until the very last minute.
Right up till the end. That's right.
Exactly. And of course they would do that.
Yeah.
And they'll continue to do that up until the last minute.
All right, so I want to finish up. I want to mention your website again. We have John Moore as our guest. He's done exhaustive research on Planet X, global warming, and rising sea levels, and also the Gulf Stream stoppage. His website is called www.thelibertyman.com. From that website, you can order a number of DVDs, including his personally created one called Global Warming, What the Government Isn't Telling You. I've seen it, and I strongly recommend it for our listeners. There's another DVD on there by Robert Harrington. I believe it's called The Day After Tomorrow. No, that's the movie. It's Are We Alone?
That's the movie.
Are We Alone?
Right.
Are We
Alone? All right.
This is great stuff. I also want to take a quick mention of our next week's show. We're going to take a little breather from this 2-week apocalypse talk that we've had, and we're going to have Chef Tess, who's the corporate chef of Honeyville Farms, to share some holiday recipes made from prepping food sources. She's a delightful woman. I've met her at a lot of these trade shows, and we're going to have Chef Tess on next week. Well, John, we're just about out of time. I want to thank you again for being on the show. Again,
you're welcome, Tony.
For people that have just joined us, Planet X is real. Now that we're past December 21st, 2012, we can really start to pay more attention to this. And John Moore's website, thelibertyman.com, is a great place to go. Well, John, thanks so much for being on the show.